The space station hung like a silver fish in the black ocean of space. Through its round windows, Dr. Jia Kim watched the huge gas giant planet below. Its swirling storms made patterns of red and orange, beautiful but deadly. Jia pushed her dark hair from her eyes and checked the screen again. The numbers didn't make sense. The storm patterns were changing too fast. Dr. Kim. The voice came from behind her. You've been working for 16 hours straight. Jia turned to see Ta standing in the doorway. His face showed worry. Just a little longer, she said. These readings are strange. Ta walked to her side and looked at the screen. The storm shouldn't be moving like that. Exactly. Jia pointed to a graph with a sharp red line climbing upward. It's like something is feeding it energy. A loud beep cut through their conversation. Red lights flashed on the main screen. Unknown object entering moon orbit, the computer announced in its flat voice. Jia's fingers flew across the keyboard. The screen showed something falling fast toward the small moon that circled the gas giant. It's going to crash, Ta said. They watched as the object hit the moon's surface. The impact was small, not a large ship, maybe just a piece of one. I need to go see, Jia said, already moving toward the door. Ta grabbed her arm. Protocol says we report this and wait for instructions. Jia gently pulled away. That will take days. Whatever crashed could be destroyed by then. This could be the first proof of alien technology, Ta, or a danger to us all. But Ta knew that look in her eyes. Jia would go with or without his blessing. 3 hours later, Jia guided the small research shuttle down to the moon's dusty surface. Through her helmet, she could see a trail in the gray dust leading to the crash site. The object wasn't what she expected. Not just broken metal or space junk. It was a pod, rounded on one end, with symbols she didn't recognize etched into its surface. The pod had split open from the impact. Jia's heart beat faster as she approached. This was not human-made. The metal had a strange sheen, almost alive under her flashlight beam. Then she saw movement inside. Against all safety protocols, Jia moved closer. Inside the broken pod was a form, large, at least 7 feet tall, as standing. It was curled in on itself, not moving except for slow rises and falls that looked like breathing. It was alive. The being had a humanoid shape, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But its skin was unlike anything Jia had ever seen. It seemed to shift colors slightly, like oil on water, with scales that reflected her light in rainbow patterns. As her light fell across its face, the being's eyes opened. They were deep purple with no whites, like polished amethysts. Jia froze. First contact. This was what humans had wondered about for centuries. The alien stared at her, then raised a 6-fingered hand, not in threat, but almost like a greeting. Then it spoke, sounds that Jia couldn't understand but clearly language. The being tried to move but winced in pain. Jia saw a dark liquid, blued, seeping from a wound on its side. All scientific caution left her. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a living being in pain. I'm going to help you, she said, knowing it couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would convey her meaning. The alien watched her carefully as she moved closer. It was injured but conscious, scared, maybe, but not aggressive. Jia made a decision that would change everything. She would bring it back to the station. I'm Dr. Jia Kim, she said, pointing to herself. And I think you just made history. The alien blinked slowly and placed a hand on its chest. Dak, it said, the sound clear even through her helmet speakers. First contact had a name. Tay's face turned white when he saw what Jia brought back to the station. You brought an alien here. His voice was a mix of fear and anger. We don't know if it's dangerous. Jia corrected. And he's hurt. I couldn't leave him to die. Dak lay on the medical table, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. His wound had stopped bleeding after Jia applied a basic seal patch, but she wasn't sure if human medicine would help an alien body. His name is Dak, she added. Tai crossed his arms. You named it. He told me his name. The alien's eyes opened at the sound of their voices. He looked around the room, taking in the strange human equipment. I think he understands we're trying to help, Gia said. Dak's skin rippled, the color shifting from deep purple to a calmer blue. He pointed to his wound and then to the medical supplies. See, he's smart. Gia grabbed a tablet and pulled up a simple picture program. She drew a human and then pointed to herself. Then she drew a rough copy of Dak and pointed to him. Dak seemed to understand. He took the tablet with careful movements. His 6 fingers moved across the screen, drawing a star system different from their own. He pointed to one of the planets he drew, and then to himself. He's showing us where he's from, Gia whispered. Over the next 3 days, Dak recovered quickly. His skin seemed to heal itself faster than human skin would. Gia created a simple picture language program to help them talk. Todd watched from a distance, always keeping a stun weapon close. On the 4th day, Dak stood up for the first time. He was tall, nearly touching the ceiling of the medical room. His body was strong and built for fighting, with muscles that moved like liquid under his color-changing skin. Terry, he said, pointing to himself. Terry, Gia repeated. Is that your people? Dak nodded, picking up the concept of the human gesture quickly. He had been watching them closely. Through pictures and simple words, they learned more about each other. The Terry were a race of warriors who protected their star system from an enemy called the Vex. Dak was a scout who had been chased into this system when his ship was damaged. Gia showed Dak how humans lived, using videos from Earth. He seemed amazed by the different climates and landscapes. When he saw people swimming, he touched his own skin and then made a motion like diving. I think his skin helps him adapt to different environments, Gia told Ta. To prove her point, Dak pressed his hand against the hot side of a heating unit. His skin darkened and thickened before their eyes. When he pulled his hand away, it was unhurt. Amazing, Gia said. His skin can protect him from extreme temperatures. Todd was still unsure. If his people are so advanced, why would he crash here? What is he running from? Later that night, they got their answer. Dak used the tablet to draw a picture of another alien race. Tall, thin beings with sharp features. He made stabbing motions and then drew planets breaking apart. The Vex, Gia said. They destroy worlds. Dak nodded gravely. He pointed to the gas giant below them and drew the same sharp-featured aliens near it. They're coming here, Tai asked, his voice tight with worry. Dak looked out the window toward the swirling storms of the planet below. His skin turned a deep red color, a warning. The Terry warrior had not come alone into their system. His enemies had followed him, and now Earth's remote research station was in their path. The alarm woke everyone on the station at once, a high, sharp sound that meant danger. Gia ran to the control room in her sleek clothes, her feet bare against the cold floor. Todd was already there, his face lit by the red warning lights. What is it? Gia asked, breathless. Todd pointed to the main screen. A solar storm. The biggest I've ever seen. On the screen, massive waves of energy poured from the system's star. The computer showed the storm's path, straight toward their station, and the gas giant they orbited. Our shields won't hold against something that big, Gia said. Dak entered the room, moving with careful steps. He looked at the screen and made a low sound in his throat. He grabbed the tablet they used to communicate and drew a quick picture. The sharp-featured Vex near the star, with lines coming from their ship toward the storm. Is he saying the Vex are causing this? Tai asked. Gia looked at Dak, who nodded firmly. They use natural disasters as weapons, she translated from his pictures. They make them worse to hurt their enemies. The station's main computer interrupted them. Storm will reach station in 8 hours. Evacuation protocol initiated. Ta moved quickly to the emergency controls. We have 5 escape pods. Each fits 2 people. How many people are on the station? Jia asked, counting in her head. 11, Tai answered, plus our guest. They looked at Dak, who stood watching the screen with dark purple eyes. That's not enough pods for everyone, Jia said quietly. Ta lowered his voice. The alien doesn't need tow. Don't even say it, Jia cut him off. Dak warned us about this threat. We owe him. The station's other 8 crew members gathered in the main hall. Fear showed on their faces as Tai explained the situation. We need to gather all the research data we can before we leave, Jia told the group. This storm could teach us how to protect Earth from similar events. There's no time, said one of the engineers. We need to leave now. Jia shook her head. I'll stay behind with Dak. We'll collect the data and take the final pod before the storm hits. Ta stepped forward. I'll stay too. No, Jia said firmly. Someone needs to make sure the others reach safety. And if something happens to us, someone needs to take the data we've already collected back to Earth. Todd wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. As head of security, his duty was to protect the crew. You have 6 hours, he said. Then you leave, data or no data. Jia nodded. The crew packed quickly, taking only what was most important. As they loaded into the escape pods, Dak stood beside Jia, watching. His skin had turned a deep blue color, like the ocean at night. Ta was the last to leave. He stood at the door of his pod and looked back at Jia. Promise me you'll leave in time, he said. I promise, Jia replied. As the escape pods launched, Jia and Dak went to work. They set up sensors to record the storm's data. Dak seemed to know exactly what they needed, pointing to equipment before Jia even asked for it. Your people have seen storms like this before, Jia realized. Dak nodded. He used the tablet to draw a picture of his homeworld being hit by a similar storm. Then he drew the Vex ships watching from a distance. They'd done this before, Jia said. They used the storms to attack. As if answering her words, the station's sensors beeped with a new alert. A ship had entered the system, larger than their station, with sharp angles that matched Dak's drawings. The Vex had arrived. Jia stared at the screen showing the Vex ship. It was black and sharp, like a knife cutting through space. Unlike human ships with their smooth curves, this one had edges that looked like they could slice the stars themselves. They found us, she whispered. Dak stood tall beside her, his skin shifting to a deep red color. He made a low sound that reminded Jia of a growl. His hands formed fists at his sides. Who are they, Dak? Really? Jia asked. Dak took the tablet and began to draw. He showed the Vex ship moving from planet to planet. At each world, he drew the same picture. Storms growing larger, planets breaking, and the Vex ship moving on. They used the storms to weaken worlds, Jia said, understanding now. Then they attack when people are most helpless. Dak nodded. He drew a picture of his own people, the Terry, fighting against the Vex. He pointed to himself and made a motion like he was watching, then running. You were spying on them, Jia guessed. They caught you, and you had to run. Dak's purple eyes met hers. He touched his chest with his 6-fingered hand, then pointed to the station and the gas giant below. He made a protecting motion. You want to protect us, Jia said. That's why you crashed here. You were trying to warn us. The alien warrior nodded again. The computer interrupted them. Storm intensity increasing. Estimated arrival now 6 hours. That's faster than before, Jia said, checking the readings. The storm is speeding up. Dak pointed to the screen showing the Vex ship. It had moved into position between the star and the station. Energy readings around it were strange, pulsing in time with the storm waves. They're making it worse, Jia realized. Just like you showed me. She turned to the communication controls and tried to reach the escaped pods, but there was too much interference from the storm. We need to warn Earth, she said. If the Vex can control storms, no planet is safe. Dak watched her work with curious eyes. His skin had changed again, now a calm blue color. He seemed less afraid than she was. "Aren't you scared?" Jia asked. Dak tilted his head, thinking. Then he used the tablet to draw a simple picture. A Terry warrior standing between a storm and a group of smaller figures. "Your people protect others from storms," Jia said. "That's what you do." Dak nodded, then added to the drawing. He showed the Terry warrior's skin coming off in pieces to cover the smaller figures. Jia frowned, not understanding. "Your skin comes off." Dak pressed his hand against the metal wall of the station. His skin rippled, and a small patch of it stuck to the wall when he pulled away. It continued to move slightly, like it was alive on its own. "Your skin is alive?" Jia asked, amazed. "It can survive without you." Dak nodded. He pointed to the patch on the wall, which was slowly crawling back toward him. When it reached his hand, it melded back into his arm seamlessly. "That's incredible," Jia said. The station suddenly shook hard. Warning lights flashed as a new alert sounded. "Orbit decay detected," the computer announced. "Station structural integrity at 85%. Jia ran to the window and looked out at the gas giant below. The storm was pushing them closer to the planet's deadly atmosphere. "We need to leave now," she said, turning to Dak. "The last escape pod is ready." Dak looked at the screen showing the Vex ship. He shook his head and pointed to the storm data they had been collecting. "We don't have all the information yet," Jia said, understanding his meaning. The alien warrior's purple eyes held hers. There was a question in them. Was the knowledge worth the risk? Jia took a deep breath. "One more hour, then we go, no matter what." The hour passed quickly as Jia and Dak gathered data about the storm. The computer counted down the minutes until it would hit the station. "We have enough," Jia finally said, saving the information to a small drive. "Let's get to the escape pod." They ran through the empty halls of the station. With everyone else gone, their footsteps echoed loudly. The station shook again, harder this time. "Warning," the computer announced. "Station structural integrity at 70%. When they reached the escape pod bay, Jia stopped suddenly. The door to the last pod was dented inward. Something had hit it during the last shake. "No," she whispered, rushing to the control panel. The screen flashed red with an error message. "Pod system damage." Dak examined the door, running his 6 fingers along the bent metal. He pressed against it, his muscles straining, but it wouldn't move. "Can we fix it?" Jia asked, although she already knew the answer. Dak looked at her with his purple eyes. He used the tablet to draw a picture of the pod's engine, with an X through it. "The engine is damaged," Jia translated. "We can't launch it." They were trapped on the station. Jia tried the communications again, hoping to reach Ta or the other pods, but there was only static. The storm was blocking all signals. "We need a new plan," she said, trying to stay calm. They returned to the control room. The main screen showed the storm getting closer. The Vex ship had moved again, now positioned to direct the worst of the storm toward the station. "They know we're here," Jia said. "They're targeting us specifically." Dak nodded. He pointed to himself, then to the Vex ship. "They want you," Jia realized. "Whatever you saw when you were spying on them, they don't want that information to get out." The alien warrior's skin turned a deep green color that Jia hadn't seen before. He drew on the tablet again, a picture of the station breaking apart, then the gas giant below, and finally a small object moving away from both. "You think we can still escape somehow?" Jia asked. Dak pointed to a maintenance access on the station map. It led to a small repair shuttle, not meant for long journeys, but possibly enough to reach the nearest outpost if they were lucky. "The repair shuttle," Jia said. "But it's outside the main station structure. We have to spacewalk to reach it." Dak nodded. He touched his skin, then pointed to the storm warnings on the screen. "Your skin can protect you from the radiation," Jia said. but mine can't. The station had 2 spacesuits in the emergency locker. Jia checked them quickly and found one had a crack in the helmet. Only one good suit, she said. That's not enough for both of us. Dak took the tablet and drew again. Himself in space, working on the shuttle, with Jia inside the station waiting. You want to go alone, Jia said. Fix the shuttle and bring it back for me. Dak nodded. His purple eyes held hers steadily. The radiation levels out there will be dangerous, even for you, Jia warned. Dak touched his chest and made a strong gesture. Then he pointed to Jia and the data drive containing all their research. You think I'm more important because of the information I carry, Jia said softly. The station rocked violently again. A loud cracking sound came from somewhere below them. Warning, the computer said. Hull breach in lower level. Sealing emergency doors. Station structural integrity at 55%. There was no more time to discuss. Dak took the good spacesuit and began putting it on. The suit was too small for him, barely covering his large frame, but it would give him some protection. Be careful, Jia said as she helped him with the helmet. Dak touched her shoulder gently. His skin glowed slightly, a soft blue light that somehow felt calming. Then he was gone, stepping into the airlock to begin his dangerous journey outside. Jia watched through the small window as Dak moved along the outside of the station. His large body looked strange in the too small human spacesuit. He pulled himself from one handhold to the next, moving toward the repair shuttle dock. The storm was getting closer. Flashes of energy lit up space around the station. The computer kept counting down the time. 3 hours until the main storm hit. Jia could see the Vex ship on the monitor. It hadn't moved for the past hour. Why weren't they attacking directly? They just sat there, directing the storm, waiting. They want to capture, not kill, Jia said to herself. They want Dak alive. A sudden bright flash made her cover her eyes. When she looked back at the monitor, she saw the Vex ship had fired some kind of energy beam. Not at the station, but at the storm itself. The beam seemed to pull the storm energy, shaping it. The computer's voice came again. Storm pattern changing. Impact in 1 hour. 1 hour, Jia gasped. That's not possible. She ran back to the window. Dak was halfway to the shuttle now. He wouldn't have enough time to reach it, prepare it, and return for her before the storm hit. Jia pressed the communication button on the wall. Dak, the storm is speeding up. You have less than an hour. There was no response. The suit radio wasn't working through the storm interference. Suddenly, the station rocked violently. This time, it wasn't the storm. The monitor showed that the Vex ship had fired directly at the station, a precise hit that damaged the main power systems but didn't destroy the station. Warning lights flashed red throughout the control room. The artificial gravity flickered, making Jia float for a moment before falling back to the floor. Emergency power activated, the computer said. Life support failing in Sector 3. Sector 3. That was where Jia was now. Cold air rushed in as the heating system shut down. The oxygen would be next. Jia ran to the emergency locker and pulled out the damaged spacesuit. It was her only chance. The helmet was cracked, but maybe she could seal it somehow. As she struggled to put on the suit, another blast hit the station. This time, a section of the wall tore open. The air rushed out with a deafening roar. Jia was pulled toward the hole, her fingers scraping against the floor as she tried to hold on. She managed to grab a bolted-down chair, holding tight as everything loose in the room flew into space. The emergency doors tried to close, but debris kept them from sealing completely. Air continued to leak out. Jia pulled herself to the communication panel. Dak, there's a breach. I need help. Outside, Dak had nearly reached the shuttle. He turned when he heard the explosion. Through his helmet, he could see a section of the station venting air and debris into space. Something inside him knew Jia was in danger. Without hesitation, He pushed off from his handhold, using the force to send himself flying back toward the damaged section of the station. He moved much faster returning than he had going out. Jia was losing strength. The air was getting thin, and it was so cold her fingers were turning blue. The damaged suit she'd partially put on wasn't sealing properly. Her vision started to blur as the oxygen level dropped. She saw a shape appear at the breach in the wall, large, with a human space helmet. Dak had returned. He pulled himself inside against the outward rush of air. The alien warrior reached Jia just as she lost her grip on the chair. He caught her with his strong arms, pulling her close to his chest. Her eyes met his through his helmet visor. "You came back," she whispered, her breath making small clouds in the freezing air. Dak looked around the ruined room. The exit to the hall was blocked by fallen debris. The breach was getting wider. The temperature was dropping fast. He knew what he had to do. Dak looked at Jia's pale face. Her lips were turning blue from the cold and lack of oxygen. The breach in the wall was growing larger, pulling more air out into space. They had minutes, maybe less. The alien warrior made a quick decision. He set Jia down gently against a wall that still seemed stable. Then he began to remove his space helmet. Jia's eyes widened. "No," she tried to shout, but her voice was weak. "You'll die." But Dak wasn't removing his whole suit, just the helmet. As the helmet came off, his purple eyes met hers. His skin immediately began to change color, turning a deep, glowing blue. The scales seemed to stand up slightly, as if preparing for something. Dak touched his chest with one six-fingered hand. Then he touched Jia's cheek gently. She could feel warmth from his fingers, even in the freezing air. Then he did something she didn't expect. He raised his other hand to his face and pushed his fingers against his cheek. His skin seemed to loosen. With a motion that looked painful, he began to peel a section of his iridescent skin away from his face. Jia gasped. Below the outer skin was another layer, darker and less colorful. Dak wasn't harming himself permanently. He had layers of skin. The piece he removed was the size of a human hand. It wiggled slightly, as if alive on its own. Dak carefully placed this living patch over the crack in Jia's damaged helmet. The skin piece moved by itself, spreading out to cover the crack completely. It glowed blue, then hardened. Jia felt warm air filling her helmet. The skin was somehow producing oxygen. Dak didn't stop there. He removed the top part of his spacesuit and began tearing more pieces of his outer skin from his chest and arms. Each removal made him wince with pain, but he didn't hesitate. He covered the worst holes in Jia's damaged suit with these living patches of his skin. Each piece moved like it had a mind of its own, spreading out to seal the gaps. They glowed with that same blue light, providing warmth and somehow generating breathable air. "What are you doing?" Jia asked, her voice stronger now that she could breathe. Dak couldn't answer with words. He had no tablet now, and the station's computer was offline, but his actions were clear. He was protecting her with parts of himself. As Dak worked, the living skin pieces began to spread, connecting with each other across Jia's suit. They formed a second skin over the damaged human technology, creating a perfect seal against the vacuum of space. But each piece Dak removed left him more vulnerable. His inner skin was darker, less able to change color, and clearly more sensitive to the cold and radiation. His movements became slower, more painful. Still, he continued. When Jia's suit was fully sealed with his living skin, he took her hand and placed it over the data drive containing all their research about the storm and the Vex. His message was clear. This information had to reach Earth. The station shook again. The room they were in was breaking apart piece by piece. Soon, there would be nothing left. Dak pulled Jia to her feet. His body, with large patches of outer skin missing, seemed weaker now. But his purple eyes were still strong and determined. He pointed to the breach in the wall, now large enough for a person to fit through. Then he pointed to the distant repair shuttle. barely visible against the stars. "We'll never make it," Gia said. "The storm radiation." Dak touched the patches of his skin covering her suit. They glowed brighter, as if responding to his touch. Then he touched his chest and made a pushing motion toward her. Gia finally understood. His living skin would protect her from the storm's radiation during the spacewalk to the shuttle. The skin he had given her, torn from his own body, was his gift of life. But for Dak, with so much of his protective outer layer gone, the storm would be deadly. "I can't let you do this," Gia said, grabbing Dak's arm. "You'll die out there without your protective skin." Dak simply looked at her with his purple eyes. He placed his six-fingered hand over the data drive again, then pointed toward Earth's direction in the distant sky. His message was clear. The information was more important than his life. The station rocked violently. A large section of ceiling tore away, revealing the star-filled space above them. The Vex ship was visible now, its sharp edges glinting in the starlight. "They're getting closer," Gia said. Dak nodded. He pointed to the repair shuttle again, then to the Vex ship. Time was running out. If they didn't leave now, they would be captured or killed. Taking Gia's hand, Dak led her toward the breach in the wall. The room was almost completely open to space now, with only small sections of floor and wall remaining. Dak's remaining outer skin glowed a fierce red color, and his muscles tensed with determination. "Together," Gia said, gripping his hand tightly. They jumped through the breach, out into the open vacuum of space. The storm's first energy waves were visible now, ribbons of blue and green light dancing across the stars. The radiation levels were rising quickly. Dak pulled Gia along, using small bursts from the space suit's thrusters to guide them toward the shuttle. The living skin covering Gia's suit glowed brighter as the radiation increased, protecting her from the deadly energy. But Dak had no such protection anymore. His inner skin began to darken in places where the radiation touched it. Gia could see him flinching with each energy wave that washed over them, but he never slowed down. The repair shuttle grew larger as they approached. It was small, just a pod with basic controls and engines, but it could get Gia back to Earth. They were almost there when the Vex ship moved suddenly, positioning itself between them and the shuttle. Dak stopped, pushing Gia behind him. Even without his tablet, Gia understood what he was thinking. "They're trying to block us," she said. The Vex ship began to glow with the same energy it had used to manipulate the storm. It was charging some kind of weapon. Dak looked around quickly. The station behind them was breaking apart as the storm's edge reached it. Large pieces of metal and equipment were floating free. His purple eyes fixed on the station's main communications array, a large dish that had torn loose from its mounting. With quick hand signals, Dak communicated his plan to Gia. He pointed to the dish, then to the Vex ship, and finally to the shuttle. Gia nodded, understanding. Together, they pushed off toward the floating dish. When they reached it, Dak positioned himself against one side. With all his remaining strength, he pushed the huge metal dish toward the Vex ship. The dish moved slowly at first, then picked up speed in the zero gravity. The communications dish slammed into the Vex ship just as it fired its weapon. The energy beam hit the dish instead of them, creating a blinding flash that lit up space like a new star being born. While the Vex ship's sensors were blinded, Dak pushed Gia toward the shuttle with one powerful thrust. The living skin patches on her suit seemed to understand, extending small flaps that caught the solar wind and helped guide her. "Dak," she called through her helmet radio, reaching for him. "Come with me." But the alien warrior was floating away from her, back toward the damaged station. His body was between her and the worst of the storm now, blocking the radiation with what remained of his own body. Gia reached the shuttle and grabbed a handhold on its side. She turned to see Dak raise one hand in a final greeting. His skin was glowing all over now, not the healthy blue or red of before, but a painful white light as his body absorbed the storm's energy to keep it from reaching her. The shuttle door opened automatically as Jia approached. As she pulled herself inside, she saw Dak push off from a piece of floating debris, but not toward the shuttle. He was heading straight for the Vex ship. 6 months had passed since that day in space. Jia stood before the Earth Defense Council, her hand steady as she held the data drive. The room was large, with a round table where 12 serious-faced leaders sat watching her. "Dr. Kim," said the council leader, "please continue your report." Jia nodded. "The data we collected proves that the Vex can control solar storms. They use this ability to attack worlds when they are most vulnerable." Images appeared on the large screen behind her, graphs and pictures showing how the Vex ship had changed the storm's path and strength. Without this information, Earth would have no defense against such an attack, Jia continued. "We would be helpless if the Vex came here." The council members looked at each other with worried faces. One woman raised her hand. "And you believe they will come?" "Yes," Jia said firmly. "The Vex move from system to system, using storms as weapons. They will reach Earth eventually. How can we defend against such power?" asked another council member. Jia smiled slightly. She had been waiting for this question. With this, she held up a small clear container. Inside was a piece of iridescent skin, shifting in color from blue to green as the light hit it. It was alive, moving slightly in the container. "This is a piece of Terry skin," Jia explained. "From Dak, the alien warrior who saved my life." The council leaned forward, staring at the strange living material. "Our scientists have studied it for months," Jia continued. "It can protect against radiation, generate oxygen, and adapt to almost any environment. And there's something else." She placed the container under a special scanner. On the screen appeared complex patterns of light within the skin. "The Terry skin contains data, like living computer storage. Dak didn't just give me his skin to protect me physically. He gave me information." The screen changed to show star maps and coordinates, dozens of them. "These are the locations of Terry outposts throughout nearby systems," Jia said. "And these," the screen changed again, "are the current positions of all known Vex ships." The council room filled with surprised whispers. "Dak knew he wouldn't survive," Jia said softly. "So he put everything he knew into the skin he gave me. His final gift was knowledge, the key to saving not just me, but potentially all of humanity." The council leader stood up. "Dr. Kim, what happened to the alien, to Dak, after you escaped?" Jia's eyes grew sad. "The shuttle sensors recorded a massive energy surge as I pulled away. The Vex ship was damaged in the explosion, but there was no sign of Dak afterward. He sacrificed himself completely." The room was silent for a moment, honoring the alien warrior's sacrifice. Then Jia straightened her shoulders. "I propose we use this information to reach out to the Terry. They have fought the Vex for generations. With their help, we can protect Earth and other worlds from destruction." 3 weeks later, Jia stood in the launch bay of Earth's newest ship. It was sleek and powerful, built with technology inspired by what they had learned from Dak's living skin. Special shields covered the hull, made from a material that mimicked the adaptive properties of Terry skin. Tai approached her as she prepared to board. "Are you sure about this mission?" he asked. "We don't know if the Terry will welcome us." "They will," Jia said confidently. "Dak wouldn't have given us their locations if he didn't trust us to use them wisely." She touched the small container hanging from a chain around her neck. Inside was a tiny piece of Dak's skin, still alive, still shifting colors. She had kept this piece for herself, a reminder of what true courage looked like. The ship's name was painted on its side in both human letters and what they had learned of Terry symbols. Dak's promise. As the ship lifted off, heading for the stars and the first Terry outpost, Jia looked out the window at Earth growing smaller below. She placed her hand against the cold glass. "Your sacrifice wasn't the end," she whispered. "It was the beginning." The living skin in the container around her neck glowed bright blue, as if in answer.